Good afternoon. Hi. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'm Mary Pat Higgins. I'm the president and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. We gather today to commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. On January 27th, 1945, Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp. Between 1942 and 1944, over 1 million people were murdered there. The vast majority of them were Jews. But under the cover of war, the Nazis and their collaborators also claimed the lives of many others: prisoners of war, people with disabilities, Roma, Sinti and Lalari, homosexuals, political dissidents, and resistors of all faiths. In 2005, the United Nations designated January 27th as a Remembrance Day to honor all the victims of the Holocaust, men, women, and children who committed no crime other than being born a certain way or fighting back against an oppressive regime. Upon issuing the resolution, the UN urged member states to develop educational programs to instill the memory of the tragedy in future generations to prevent genocide from occurring again. At the museum, we work toward this goal every day through our mission to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference. By being here with us today, you are helping us achieve our mission. Each of us can take the lessons from the Holocaust and apply them in our daily lives. We can all be upstanders. I know we have some educators with us today participating in our Candy Brown Holocaust and Human Rights Educator series. I would like to extend a very special thank you to each of you for teaching our students about the past to help inform their future. Would you wave your hands so we can all thank you? We are grateful for your work with our youth and to be a part of the journey with you. I would also like to recognize a very important group of people in our community, our Holocaust survivors. These men and women are the heart and soul of this museum, and they remind us every day of the best of humanity. I appreciate you all being with us to help celebrate and honor them. As you all came into the theater today, you saw the names of our local DFW survivors, hidden children, refugees, and kinder transportees. I would now like to recognize the survivors who are here today. When I call your name, would you please wave your hand or wave? Rosian Zerner. Max, let's hold our applause till the end, and then we'll give a big round of applause for these amazing people. Max Spindler, Paul Kessler, Maggie First, Andres Laco, and Walter Levy. We are so grateful that you're all with us today. I would also like to take a moment to remember the survivors who we lost in 2023. Sadly, this is a long list, so bear with me. Jack Belzaki Bell, Ted Bernstein, Rosa Hirsch Bloom, Muriel Candle Sapo, Berta Thalmeyer Getz, Tibor Grunberger, Ralph Hockley, Margaret Turk Hopkowitz, Doris Markowitz, Friedel Hess Marks, Dr. Liliane Grossinger Richmond, Nikolai Safir, and Heinz Wallach. May their memories be for a blessing. For our program today, we are pleased to present a special museum presented or produced short film, Hidden Children, Secret Sanctuaries. Following the screening, I will sit down with 3 of the 4 survivors featured in the film to discuss their experiences as hidden children during the Holocaust. I kindly ask you now to silence your cell phones so that we may all listen without disruptions. Please draw your attention to the screen for the film.
As the Nazi war machine moved across Europe at the start of World War II, well over 1 million Jewish children were caught in its wake. Approximately 1.5 million of them perished during the war. Many of those that survived did so by going into hiding with the help of networks of individuals working in conjunction with religious, welfare, and resistance organizations. Some children were able to be hidden with family members. Others were separated from loved ones and had to survive in the care of strangers.
My parents were in hiding in probably an attic. They had an argument, and I didn't quite understand what they were saying. My mother, I remember, broke out in tears. The argument that ensued when they had decided they were going to put my brother and I into hiding.
My mother took what was left of our family from over 20, and we traveled to another village, and we lived there with 2 families. My mother and I with one, the Haiduk family, and my aunt and uncle and grandmother with another family across the street. On September 9, 1944, we were awakened by loud yelling and screaming, saying, "Run, the Germans are here." My mother threw on whatever clothes we had handy, and she and I managed to escape to the forest outside the village. We were probably there 2 to 3 weeks. I remember eating berries, and I guess whatever else we could find.
I was interned in the Kovno Ghetto, which was the confined concentration camp in Kaunas, Lithuania. When my parents saw that the elderly and the children were dispensable, they dug a hole under the barbed wire that was surrounding the ghetto where I could crawl through. On the other side of the barbed wire on the day that I escaped was Bronia Budrejkaite. She was my father's secretary, and we ran across that bridge of the Limnos River to her apartment where she hid me for a couple of days.
Some hidden children could pass as non-Jews and hide in the open. In these instances, rescuers created a false narrative, often explaining that a child was illegitimate or a relative visiting from the countryside.
We had to change our name and became another person. My mother was Irene Meunier and I was Ginette Meunier. My father was not my father anymore. It was Henri Mando, because if we were arrested together, we were not together. We didn't try to hide. We just lived in the open, but we became somebody else. We were not supposed to be Jewish.
A constant fear hung over hidden children and their protectors. If suspicions arose, both could be reported to authorities with dire consequences. For this reason, hidden children were often moved between alternate locations and different rescuers.
In my mind's eye, I can visualize about 4 or 5 orphanages that I'd been in. One incident that I do remember, I was in a room and I remember that I was told not to remember any names that might have been said or recall what any of these people look like.
Bronia Budrejkaite could not keep me. She was putting herself in great danger, and she found another place for me, which was with Natasha Fugalevchute and Natasha Yegorova. I left them because their neighbor was one of Natasha's brothers, and he was a full-fledged Nazi, and I got whooping cough. He knew that his sister didn't have any children, and I was putting them in danger again. So I was sent to the farm of Lida Golubovina, who was my third rescuer and my main rescuer. And it was a more idyllic life, a more calm life.
Hidden children were sometimes physically concealed, some for only brief periods of time, others for the entirety of the war. They often had to remain silent for long periods of time.
We stayed Lyon until the end of the war, but I didn't stay with my parents. I went to several little boarding schools because it was not safe for me to be with them. So the Germans started to retaliate, fighting with the resistance. So when my father heard that on the BBC, he wanted me to be out of there, and my mother figured out a way to come and get me. But it was on the same day that 3 German officers decided to come and have dinner with the students. So right away, the headmaster told us, don't come to the dining room, stay in your room upstairs. My room was right above the dining room. And we sat there, we didn't talk, we didn't think, we were silent for about 3 hours.
One day, my mother saw Peter, the son of the Hajduk family, and she went and spoke to him. After dark, some of them came and brought us back to the village, and in their house, they dug a hole. I would say the hole was maybe 4 by 4, maybe 4 by 5. I know that my mother had a hard time stretching out, and she's not very tall. When they could, once a day, they would bring us some food, usually some cold soup, and sometimes a piece of bread. We passed the time, she told me stories, folk tales, Yiddish, Jewish, and in Slovak. And I can't remember this, but I guess we did a lot of counting. I could count to 10,000, I know, when we were free. There was also soldiers living in the homes of the villagers, including the house we were in. So they lived in one room, the Hajduks in another, and we were in the hole.
Even when hidden successfully, many children suffered the trauma of isolation or separation from loved ones, the effects of which could last for years.
Finally, after the war, we go back home and I have my family. But when I think of Monique and Micheline and the rest of the family, my heart aches. Edith, my best friend, all of them go home as orphans. I'm the only one who is lucky enough to have my parents. I will never forget this because it just feels so unfair.
One of the things that is a landmark with survivors is fear and mistrust. And it comes from the fact that we were never sure why people were trying to kill us. So I was always on guard, always stressed about what should I do or shouldn't I do, or should I just be myself? And being myself was a very difficult thing to do in those times.
We had occasional visitors' day at the various orphanages. It was always extremely difficult because I was all by myself. But one day, I remember that so well. One of the boys pointed me out to his relatives. I think it was his mother. And she looked at me and motioned me over. So I came and she talked with me and she offered me some of the stuff that they were having. They were just having fried green beans. No one had ever done that to me. And to this day, I still remember that day. I had dreams occasionally of being reunited with my mother. And occasionally,
I even thought that I might have had a brother. All those memories kind of left me. From 4.5 years old, you go another year, and before long, your memories vanish. You have to cope with your new environment. So you can't dwell on the old.
Despite how challenging their experiences or personal ordeals may have been, many hidden children feel gratitude to their rescuers and parents for making the sacrifices that allowed them to survive.
I am forever grateful for the Catholic Church and the nuns and priests who risked their lives to save the Jewish children under their care.
I'm thankful. They saved my life. They saved my brother's life.
It takes, I heard, about 12 or so rescuers to save a child. I'm proof that miracles do happen and that there are good people who risk their lives to save somebody else's life, in this case, mine. I'm fully committed to live my life in gratitude now.
And I think often, too, about all the people who helped me during the war. I would never forget their generosity. I would never forget the courage that they have.
I decided I wanted to find anybody that is still alive from that family that hit us. And one of the things the granddaughter Eva told me, she said, you know, my mother always used to tell me the story about hiding that family. I was young, but I never believed it. I thought she was making it up. My mother always wondered what happened to that little boy. And thanks to the Hajduk family, he had a great life.
I went to an orphanage. I was denounced by the nuns, but the priest saved me within minutes of the time that the Gestapo came to get me. And some other children were rounded up there, and again, my miracle happened.
That February, before we left Paris, my grandfather came to see us. It was the last time I saw him, because he was arrested in 1943, sent to Drancy, and then Auschwitz. And I miss him terribly. He was very dear to me.
We were liberated on April 1, 1945. They took us across the street where the other family was hiding my aunt and uncle. Of our family from over 20, 7 survived.
One day, the nuns told me that on the morrow, I would have a visitor come to the orphanage. I thought, maybe it's my mother, I don't know. My brother came over to me and he hugged me, and I hugged him because that's the first time that I realized that I did have a brother and it wasn't just something that I had dreamt of.
Here they are. We are so incredibly fortunate to have Rosian Zerner, Paul Kessler, and Max Spindler as part of our community, sharing their stories with people throughout North Texas and giving all of us the inspiration to do this work day in and day out. And I'm delighted that you all could be with us today to hear us talk a little bit more about their experiences. I know, when watching that film left me with a lot of questions, and I'm sure it did you too. So I will ask questions for a little bit of time, and then we will have time for all of you to write your questions down. You should have gotten a note card when you came in, so if you have a question for Rosian, Max, or Paul, please write it down when we start the Q&A portion of the program, and our staff will come by and pick them up. So let's get started. Max, I'd like to start with you. Could you tell us more about how the Catholic priest and nuns took you in? Did they know you were Jewish? And were there other Jewish children in hiding with you that you knew of?
Well, Mary Pat, I was only about 4 years old, so I don't really remember what happened. However, I was in a conference for hidden children from Belgium, and I met one of the underground workers that were gathering children, Madame Gullin, and she told us at the conference there that she would tell the children stories like, would you like to go to a farm and see some cows and ducks and geese, and other stories to allay the children's fear as the parents would hand them over to the rescuers. So I don't know how I got into the Catholic orphanages. I just remember that suddenly I am in a Catholic orphanage. However, I don't think that all the nuns at the Catholic orphanage would know about it, because it's a matter of security. You just want one person to know and no one else. And certainly the same thing for security when it comes of knowing of other Jewish boys or girls at the orphanage.
So do you remember feeling different from the other children, or you were part of the group?
It took me a while to adjust. And yes, I was shy, and I did not know the language as well as some of the other boys, because in my parents' home we probably spoke a different language.
I'll come back to you. I have many more questions. Paul, you and your mom were hidden literally in a dirt hole in the ground, and you spoke about some of the ways your mother occupied you. But can you tell us a little bit, your memories about how you survived that time and what it was like?
Well, I have some memories, but very few. I was 5 years old when we went into hiding. And I do remember being in that hole. I do remember the people hiding us most days when they could bring us some soup, sometimes a piece of bread. And my mother sometimes didn't eat anything because I might cry because of hunger and cold. And the thing you need to know is that in that same house and in that village of about 800 people, when the Germans invaded that village and stayed there, I don't know what their plans were or what they were trying to do, but they actually, as they did many other places, occupied the homes of the villagers, took their food and whatever they wanted. So 2 German soldiers, I found out later, were living in that same house. And if we're found, we and the people hiding us would be shot on the spot, and no doubt about it. So it was important my mother keep me occupied. I remember she telling me stories, as I said in the film, in Yiddish, Slovak. And as I said in the movie, I know we did a lot. Like, I can't remember this, but I guess we did a lot of counting, because I know when we were freed, I could count to 10,000. So to this day, I wonder how I didn't become a great mathematician.
How do you know you're not, right?
I know.
Rosian, can you share with us a little more about what your life was in hiding? Can you tell us about the location where you were the longest, and do you know, were there soldiers nearby?
Lithuania is a very small country. It is 10 times into Texas, so you can imagine the whole country being as large as Texas. So the distances weren't very long, and we were from one city to another was like from here to Houston at most. The life that I had there was mostly on the run, because the moment suspicions got in people's minds, it was a dangerous place to stay on. So I went from Kaunas, which is the city that I was born, and it's also called Kovno in Kovna, depending on whether you're Russian or Yiddish. And then I was hiding in a village called Kolautova, which happens to be the village that we used to go for vacations. And it's such it was ironic in a way, because it was a place where the soldiers went by. There was a road that went by right outside the farmhouse, and they would stop by and ask for food, like Paul said. And one day, one just wanted to come and play with me. Apparently, he had a child just about my age in Germany, and he wasn't very happy with the war. But my recollection was that that was the only time that I saw a soldier firsthand.
Did you know enough about your situation to be afraid of the soldiers?
To this day, when I see a uniform, even a policeman, I have to stand up straight or something. I don't know exactly, but it does have an impact. Uniforms are something to be admired because they liberated us, but it's also something that I looked at in fear for too long.
Max, in the film, you talked about having dreams occasionally of your mother, and at least a sense that you might have a little brother. And then after the war, you found out that you did indeed have a brother, and you were united with Gerard. Can you tell us what that was like, and how long you were together before you moved to different countries again?
Yes. A few days or maybe a day before, I was to be reunited with him. I was told that I was going to have some important visitors coming to visit with me. And on that Sunday, I was brought to the office of the orphanage. And there was a lady there
who was introduced as Madame Abras and her husband as Monsieur Abras. And there was a child with them. I did not know exactly what was going to happen. And then Madame Abras introduced herself to me as Madame Marie Abras, and her husband as Monsieur Joseph Abras. And then she said, "Here's your brother." And it was just like that.
How old were you, Max, at
I
this
was
time?
about, at that time, it was already after the war,
Uh-huh.
so I was about 9 years old.
Oh, my goodness. So 4 years you spent in the orphanage. Okay.
Yes.
Continue, I'm sorry.
And my brother extended his arms out to me like that because I was a lot taller than he was, and wanted to hug me, and I bent down, of course, and we hugged. And then they took us out to a restaurant in town of Ostend. And that was my first time that I remember ever being in a restaurant. And also the first time I took a taxi ride that I know of. And Madame Brass talked with me, tried to ease my anxieties and all that, and then brought us all back to the orphanage and told me that we'll get to meet again. And that changed my whole outlook, really, because it's the first time that I felt that I was not alone in this world. And indeed, that my recollection or my dreams, whatever that was, that I had a brother, were true. But I was disappointed to find out that I did not have my parents anymore.
She did tell you that your parents
Somebody
murdered?
told
Somebody
me, whether
told
it was
you?
she or the nuns, told me at that point that I did not have parents anymore.
And then how long was it before you two, did you ever get to live together?
Yes. That was around Christmas time. And then I went again for the Easter break and summer break. I went to visit with them again. And then that winter I did not. The following winter I did not. But then again, in Easter, I did go and visit with them. And eventually I was brought into the Jewish community in an orphanage in Antwerp.
Was your brother there with you?
Yes, my
Wonderful.
brother and I
Okay.
were brought together to the Jewish community. And in 1949, we the orphanage migrated to Israel. After about 6 to 10 months, my recollection is somewhat vague, my brother was picked up by an aunt whom I did not know that I had, my father's sister, and he went to live with her. The reason she didn't pick me up is that they could not afford to handle 2 kids, nor was their apartment large enough for that. And then about 18 months later, she asked me if I would be willing to go and stay with my other aunt in America. Now, this is something new that I just found out. And I said yes. And then in 1952, that was possible. I came to the airport, and all of a sudden, there's this man who has a sign, Max Spindler, on
his chest at the airport, and he introduces himself, of course, in English, and then I realized that I couldn't speak with him. I had no language in common. Now, he spoke Polish, Russian, German, English, and Yiddish. And when he took me home, they decided that they were going to teach me Yiddish first because they thought that I may have some residual memory of having learned Yiddish.
Wow. And which city was this?
That was in Brooklyn, New York.
Brooklyn. And how old were you?
By that time, I was almost 14.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. Fascinating. Were you able to go back and visit your brother?
Not at that time. In 1957, they came to the States, but my aunt did not like it here. She did not like Brooklyn. Had she come to Los Angeles or
Or Dallas.
or Dallas,
Dallas.
the red brick seemed to upset her. Tel Aviv, where she lived, the houses were painted white, and she could not stand that.
Interesting.
That climate.
Sorry. So he moved back.
So he moved back with his aunt. Yeah.
Paul, in your hiding, you were in hiding 10 months. Is that
7 months?
7 months, and then the village was liberated by the Soviets.
Yes.
Can you share with us what you remember? What was it like coming out of being in that sort of confined space? What was your recovery like? And how long were you there before you were able to move away?
Well, we were liberated April 1, 1945. And I remember, so I'm 5.5 years old now. And I remember hearing a lot of shooting and yelling, and it actually sounded like celebration. And we were liberated by Russian military. We came out of that hole, and for a while we could not open our eyes to the sun. It was a beautiful sunny day because we'd been in the dark so long. After we regained our eyesight, they took us across the street where another family was hiding, my aunt and uncle. Also in that village where we went to for what we thought was safety was my grandmother. There was no sign of her. And so after several days, when we regained some strength, we traveled back to the village where we lived and where we came from. Luckily, our home was still there, and we moved back in. And 2 weeks later, my grandmother showed up. That day, when the German soldiers came to that village, when my mother and I escaped to the forest, she was hiding behind a bush, and one of the townspeople turned her in. Gladly she survived. Probably it was in a lucky way because there was not much time left. The World War II ended in May of 45. Auschwitz was liberated in January, which was why we were just commemorating Holocaust Remembrance. So she didn't have a long time there, September to January. And that probably saved her life.
That's remarkable, though, that she did survive that. Do you remember, was she sent on a death march from Auschwitz to a camp in Germany, or was she liberated?
I don't remember.
You don't recall?
Not that I know of. As far as I know, she was liberated from Auschwitz.
And your family, your aunt and uncle and your grandmother survived. Were there other family members?
Yes, well, we had a total of about over 20 family members that lived in this small village of about 3,000, and 7 survived. Yeah.
And how long, Paul, did you stay in the village before you were able to immigrate to the U.S.?
Well, we started life over again. We I guess planned to stay there. I don't know exactly. I was actually very sick after the war, probably from malnutrition. I had scabs all over my body. I remember my mother cutting scabs from my hair, and I was bedridden for about a year. And then life started over. I started school, and we began again. So as far as I know, I mean, I my age and all, I don't remember much discussion about the war or what happened, any of that. And I think I was fortunate enough to be that young that I really didn't know as much as what I could have, which was better. And so I started school, and we started working again. By the way, that village had about 3,000 people before the war. 1/3 or over 1,000 were Jews, had lived there since the 1600s. After the war, there was 120. So that village went from 3,000 to 2,000 about. And so this was today Slovakia, and that time it was Czechoslovakia. And in 1948, there was a military coup supported by Russia, and the communists took over. And I guess my mother said something, I don't know if she did, but first the Nazis and now the communists, we need to leave here. Wow. And so today when I hear about Democrats, socialists, and communists and what have you, they have no idea what they're talking about. So we managed, my mother remarried. In 1948, in that same year, we managed to get probably one of the last people to leave legally, because eventually the communists closed the borders, and we left and eventually wound up in a couple of years. We left, I think it was 1950, and eventually wound up in Los Angeles, where my stepfather had a brother and sister who came before the war and helped us out.
Your mother must have been so strong. Rosian, you were able to be reunited with both of your parents, which was so unusual in the war, but particularly for Jews of Lithuania. Can you share with us what that experience was like, and then where you all went on to live before you came to the United States?
Yes, it was one of the many miracles in my life that I was reunited with my parents. Lithuania is one of the countries in Europe that is supposed to have killed most of its Jews compared to its population proportionately. So they say between 94 and 96% of the Jews were killed. You're looking at a maybe 4%er here. Wow. And the 4% does not include the miracle that my mother and father survived. So it's a triple miracle, actually, in that we were reunited and we continued our lives and rebuilt them and reinvented ourselves. But the scars were there. My parents were not the same as before the war. I was separated from them in the entire war, but I did see my mother once. She brought me a little doll she had knitted from scraps of wool, and I cherished that doll until the end. I mean, it really disintegrated. So, and it was difficult for me to call her mother, because the narrative was that I was the illegitimate child of my father's secretary. And that's why I was being sent to a farm, because she was ashamed. Oh, my goodness. And so I called her mother when she would visit me, just for structure.
And again, how old were you when you?
Probably about 6 or 7.
Okay.
Yes.
Very confusing.
But I had a third mother. And And that was the woman on the farm, Lida Goluboviene, where I stayed the longest. And she actually, I think, thought that if she would adopt me if my parents were killed. So I was going with the mothers, and that was okay. And then when we were reunited, we were liberated by the Russians. Lithuania is like Texas in some ways. It doesn't have mountains. But we were between two hills, which were considered mountains in Lithuania. And on one were the Russians, on the other one were the Germans. They were shooting, and we were in the middle. That's how we were liberated. And the Russians were not too kind to my father because he was a capitalist before the war. We were a privileged family. And so they actually, I was told, they had a meeting at the Politburo what to do with Bagriansky because they didn't know how to treat him because he was a partisan during the war. He was fighting along the Russians to liberate Lithuania from the Germans. We didn't wait. We escaped. And then we went through Poland, where we saw the destruction, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, where we ended up in prison. And then we settled in Italy after being in Austria at a displaced persons camp. That was an experience because people came from all over Europe. They always thought that the next country would be better, but Europe was, there were 42,000 camps in Europe, if you can imagine. Every village was Nazified in some way. And in Austria at that time, it was divided between the British, the Americans, and it was divided so that we were in the British sector, and we wanted to go to Israel. But it was impossible in those days. So we ended up in Italy after being whisked out by the Jewish brigade from our camp there. And we stayed there for 6 years. It was wonderful for me. It was the first stable place. I studied at La Scala Ballet School. I went to school. I had friends that didn't disappear all the time. And it was almost like, oh, there is a better way. We can do more, be more, contribute more, whatever. So I was devastated when we came to America. But I liked jazz and spirituals. And
You did not look devastated in the photo on the ship.
No.
You looked quite glamorous.
No, I had my 16th birthday party on the ship, actually. And I had to go back to my cabin at 10 o'clock because my parents were very strict.
So your father was a partisan during the
Yes.
war, so he joined and was fighting.
Yes.
What about your mom? Where was she?
My mom had studied in Paris with Nadia Boulanger for piano and fluent in French, and she one day just walked out of the ghetto, took off her yellow star that was required, and pretended to be a French widow. She was blue eyes and, didn't look that much Jewish. But she also had to keep running. The suspicious were rampant, and everybody was denouncing each other. It was a very cruel culture. The Lithuanians were collaborators in many ways. Even before the Germans arrived, the Nazi Germans, there was, the Anschluss came after 150 villages in Lithuania became Nazi-free. Jewish, Juden-free, the way they call it, free of the Jews, and cruelly so. They burnt them in synagogues and inhuman humans. Yeah. So then we had family here in the United States. They came here in the mid-1900s, and It was an amazing life. America was full of choices. It was full of possibilities. And I feel so blessed, and more miracles.
Where did you first live in the United States?
We came to Boston.
Okay.
We came through New York to Boston because that's where most of our family is. And that's where I lived most of my life until I came to Dallas 10 years ago. Yeah, because of my son is here. Yeah.
So each of you, particularly you, Rosian and Paul, but there were individuals that you recall meeting with that helped rescue you. Max, have you kept in touch with these amazing people that helped save you? Do you know what's happened to them? Max, let's start with you.
Paul, you go
Well,
first.
as I told you that I was only 4 years old, so I don't really know the names of or remember the names of any nuns or priests that I was at. And the only person that I really maintained a relationship was with the Abrasos, who had kept my brother during the war.
Have you ever been back to visit the orphanages? And were you in 2 orphanages, Max?
I was in at least 4.
At least 4, my goodness.
I didn't know which ones they were.
Okay.
And the last one I was in, I did go back, and it is no longer an orphanage. It is a private day school. So when I asked if I could see the dormitories where I was denied. I asked what happened to the school, and they said to the orphanage, and they said they just closed it. So I was unable to see anyone or anything there.
Paul, I know you have a story I'd love for you to share about going back to the village and meeting the descendants of the family that hid you. Would you?
Well, let me preface that by saying, so for most of my life, I would say I only really thought about one thing as far as the Holocaust goes, and that my father was killed in Auschwitz. And I really never thought about much of anything else. We came here, had very little. Communists would let you take equivalent of $50 and what you would carry, lived in one room. And so as soon as I could learn English, within about 6 months, I started delivering newspapers to help the family. And so we were busy, I really just trying to make a life and survive at the beginning. And so as I say, I never really even thought about much of anything else about it or spoke about it. And I would say on 9/11, I had just retired. I was 61. And on 9/11, happened, which really upset me or concerned me. And I also started reading about all the anti-Semitism against Jews in Israel again. And so I decided I wanted to do something. And so in the meantime, what I'm getting at, the only other thing that I really did is at some point, I can't remember when, I wanted to see if I could find the people or relatives of the people that hit us, and if there's any way if I can repay them, if they need any help, or if I could do something for them. Now, by this time, my mother passed away at a young age. She passed away in 1977. And I left home when I was 18. I would visit back, but I was not around there very much. And in the 1990s, I worked in Poland and Czech Republic. And people that hit us today, Slovakia, was Czechoslovakia at one time. And I knew the name of the village, and I went to the tourist offices, nobody knew. I even had been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and see if they had anything or knew anything about it. I Googled, nothing. Actually, you can Google that name now, and it's on Google. But anyways, I forget what year, shortly to 2000s, I was in Washington, D.C. again, and there's an area in the National Museum there where they do the archives and histories and all. And I went and spoke to them again, and I said, do you know anything, what happened to this village? Where is it? What happened to it? And they went through their information and found 4 people that in their story, they had mentioned that village. And to make a long story short, I wound up finding one of the people. He was in Florida. And he was hidden by another family. But his story was amazing. I mean, he could have been my brother. It was so similar. Family, what they cooked, what they ate, and what they did. And so now I had the name of the village as it is today. And he also referred me to a lady from that part of the world that lived near a city near that village, that lived in the United States, and that helped him. And I contacted her, and she started to help me try and find someone from this family. We sent a letter to the mayor of the town. By the way, that town was about 800 people. When we were hidden there, it's still about 800 people. And lo and behold, we found the granddaughter of the people that hid us. And in 2018, we all visited. Undoubtedly, it was a very emotional moment. And we spent a day there. I arranged to, whom I have gotten to know, Representative Kay Granger. She arranged for an American flag to be flown over the national capital for one day. And her office or whoever sent me the flag. It was in honoring this village in Slovakia. She sent me the flag. We arranged to have plaques in English and Slovak, and there was a presentation to the mayor of that village, and these people just couldn't believe that. You know, to this day, people in those small villages, America is still the land where streets are paved in gold. And, you know, we really believed that when we came here. And when we came here, I said, I said to my mother, streets are not paved in gold. and we lived in one room and all that. And besides that, nobody played soccer in 1951 in America. They knew what it was. I couldn't believe it. Why did we come here?
Right.
And so we spent an amazing day, too short, with the granddaughter, with some of her family, and the house we were hidden in. You can see from the diagram. I mean, this was a wooden house, could have been out of the 1880s, and so it's no longer there. It was rebuilt, but the person that owned it now allowed us to walk around the area and this, and we went and visited the graves of her grandparents, and we actually brought a plaque that I had translated by a Slovak lady here, and it was a plaque placed in gratitude on the burial site of those people. And as it is in the Jewish religion, when you visit a burial place, you leave a rock. It's a sign that you've visited. And we had a rock that my wife's mother would polish and all, and we brought this rock from Texas. And so they had their priest there, and there was prayers. And at the end of the ceremony, the mayor said something, okay, I'll take the rock and the plaque and I'll take care of this. And the granddaughter said, no, I'll take it. And she went and grabbed that thing. She was not going to take any chance of anybody messing this up. And we brought her some gifts. We had no idea what they would like. I brought several small things. And then I took her aside when I can, and I said, I don't really know you, what you need, what you like. And I had an envelope with money that I wanted to give her. They would not take it. These simple peasant farmers who risked their life to save another one. It's an amazing story.
For those of you, who are new to the museum, hopefully you saw outside this red panel that has our definition of an upstander. We talk a lot about the upstanders in the Holocaust and in other genocides and, working towards rights for all in the United States. But the reality is that the majority of people throughout Europe were not upstanders. They were bystanders or maybe even collaborators. I wonder, did you get any sense this village saved not just you and your mother, but your aunt and uncle and your grandmother, and this other person had a similar experience? What was special about this village, do you think?
Well, I don't know. There was 4 families that saved people in that village, and out of a town of 800, that's a huge amount. All these people risking their lives. And I actually met the family that saved the man and his family that I told you I contacted in Florida. And we had a brief visit with them because the lady from Slovakia, she was with me and she knew them. But on the other hand, you had a person that turned my grandmother in. Right. And most will probably be silent. I can't say I would blame any of them. I mean, this is risking your own life to save people you don't know. And I've always said, I wondered if I would have the same courage to do something like that. And when I speak about my experiences, and I tell that to students mainly, I said, I really don't know if I would be that courageous. Probably wouldn't know till you would have to face making that kind of decision.
And many of the people that have been interviewed that were rescuers just said it was the right thing to do. Yeah. They didn't see themselves as being heroes, right? They just felt that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Just remarkable. Rosian, were you able to reunite with the 2 Natashas or the?
And I also want to respond to that because what you said is so true. My rescuers, some of them were Christian Scientists, some were Russian Orthodox, and some were Catholics. And some of them did it for religious purposes and some of them just did it because it was the right thing to do. And what Paul said about, would I do it, would he do it? We don't know until we're faced with this. Because we always like to think loftily of ourselves, but especially since we were rescued. But how do we know whether we have the courage? How do we know that we have the stamina? How do we know that we know anything about the situation? So that's why I live my life in gratitude, because there's some people who are the upstanders and we have to honor them. And I did go back to Lithuania to thank my rescuers. One of them, Lida, the farm rescuer,
your third mother.
I'm sorry?
Your third mother.
My third mother, indeed. Yes. She was taken by the Russians and to Siberia because she was a capitalist. She had land. So they did release her after a while. And when we arrived in Italy, we had nothing. We slept on cement floors in the Jewish community. There was not enough to eat. And so we had to rebuild our lives there. But when we came to America, my father was able to reestablish his contacts from before the war. And then we started sending things that they needed. They loved coffee, just coffee. We bought a piano for Lida, who was released because she could do piano lessons afterwards. We asked them what they needed, and again, some had lists, and some said, no, we didn't do it for this. And when I went back to visit them, it was like a love fest. You know, we were so in touch with the dangers that we have overcome and for the gift of life. But how do you thank somebody for the gift of life well enough? You know, there's no way to measure that. And I'm forever grateful. Yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful to have the people, the brave people that saved each of you, because you're a gift to our community, and we're so lucky to know you. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. I know, even after all this time, it's still hard to see. Was it hard to go through this filming process and tell yourself your story and then see yourself on film?
Well, I had just gotten over COVID. And it was hard.
That was hard for a different reason. Yes.
Right. And it was also I had to face some things that I hadn't faced. The questions were insightful. And I was just hoping that I did my rescuers justice, you know. Yeah.
Max and Paul, you had both shared your testimony with the museum before. So, and Paul, you've been sharing your story with groups. How long have you been a survivor speaker now?
Probably from maybe around about 20 years, 2003, I would say.
But it's still hard,
well,
right?
you know, really, I look at it a little bit different way because I've never found it hard because I actually found it very rewarding. So that in your senior life or your older age, I've received thousands of letters from students about impacting their life. And, you know, rather than sitting on the couch watching TV, I was fortunate, actually, I feel, to have this opportunity and done, I think, some good, a lot of good. So it's really been very gratifying for me. Hasn't been hard to do, and sometimes I cry. But generally, and I speak about, not so much about my story, which is, you know, not quite as dramatic as people who are in concentration camps and what have you. But then my main focus is teaching some of the many lessons from the Holocaust. So I talk about education, being an upstander, and so on and so on.
And so for each of you, before we're about to take questions from the audience, so we'd be writing your questions down and handing them to our staff. If, you know, when you have the opportunity to share your story with a young person, what is the main thing you'd like to teach them, you know, or to convey to them about your experience? Max, I'll start with you. I'm looking at you, but yeah.
Okay. If I talk to a young person, what I like to teach them or discuss is tolerance for others. I don't know how to teach a young person anything but to accept somebody else for what they are and not be abusive to others.
Well, I think definitely the main focus is that we're trying to make these students especially to become upstanders rather than bystanders. And you know, sometimes I use the example of, I remember in school many times, all of a sudden a couple of kids would start fighting. And what are most of the others doing? In a circle around cheering for one or the other. And I say to them, no, you know, I'm not telling you to get in the middle of the fight or anything, but you could go get the principal. You could get somebody to come and help and break it up and do something. You know, not just stand there and be enthusiastic about seeing two people fight, and you could take that further and further. So it's all about acting, doing something, not being just neutral and going about whatever you want to do.
Rosian?
Well, when you read the headlines today, some have said, well, the Holocaust is now again. And for me, this has been the most horrific nightmare to think that twice in my lifetime I could see the headlines that say, oh, we want to kill Jews again. And it's happening, and I think we need to be vigilant that all the lessons that the Holocaust can teach and should teach is what not to do. And you can, each and every one of you, choose to become a bystander or contribute to a better world. So, I mean, if you think that you don't have the power, each one of you, I mean, if you have a drop of water that goes in the ocean is not the same because of that drop of water. So, if you think you cannot do it, try it. See what you can contribute to the world and make it a different world, a better world, a world where the righteousness of the rescuers and the possibility of goodness is available. So I do urge you, when you go back to your friends, your families, and everyone else, see what you can do. See what you can talk to them about if you see something emerging that is cruel or ignorant or anything that you can contribute. Do it. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh. Comes from the heart.
I know. Paul,
I
and then
couldn't
we'll-
think of the word before, but Elie Wiesel said, indifference is a greater sin than the act itself.
Right. Yeah,
And so
very important.
not to be indifferent is
Absolutely.
important.
And the opposite of hate is indifference. Yeah.
The opposite of hate is indifference?
Didn't I read that right? I think so.
Ah,
I'm not sure.
but both are
but it's-
both are
yeah,
harmful.
yeah.
Both are harmful. So we do have some questions from the audience. Let's try to, and I could talk with you all day, but I want to answer some of these people's questions. So let's see, for all of you, your parents in many ways put their trust in others to take care of you, despite not knowing what would happen. What do you think of their bravery and their faith?
Anybody?
Anybody, all of you.
Well,
Whoever
my
feels compelled.
parents were my first rescuers because they dug the hole under the wire that surrounded the ghetto and timed the guards for their changing, which was just minutes sometimes, and they really risked their lives to do that. So when you see something like that happening, you know that there's more to come, so.
Well, I think that really didn't have any choice. Those people that hit us, I mean, we didn't know their history to speak of. We didn't really know much about them. Yes, we lived with them for, I'm not sure how many, maybe 3-4 months. I don't know if we paid them money. I know we couldn't have had very much. So there was really no choice but to put our trust in the people that were hiding us.
Max, didn't the parents and the other parents and your parents come together to say that they would, if someone survived, that they would help identify the kids?
Yes, my parents, my father at least, was from Gerard, and in Belgium there were quite a few people from Gerard in Poland, and they had formed an organization of fellow Jesuits, and they were all under the same situation, and they made an agreement that whoever would survive this catastrophe would make sure that the children would be brought up in a Jewish environment. And indeed, there was a survivor, and he found he was in concentration camp until 1945, was freed, went back to Belgium, and as soon as he got established, he said that he started to look for us, for all the people. He found me and my brother, and then he found some other girl, and he tried to convince the people she was staying with to allow her to return to the Jewish community. And they were indifferent because the girl had turned into a juvenile delinquent. And when they tried to talk to her, she didn't care to join any situation. That's the story that Maurice told me. But for myself and my brother, the people that were holding my brother felt obligated to return us to the Jewish community. I was visiting with my brother at a time, and they made a ruse to allow Maurice to take us back to the Jewish community. I think they acted out of a feeling that that is what our parents would have wanted.
There is another question from the audience asking if the priest baptized you. Do you recall?
Yes, I do recall. At some point, because I would attend church every Sunday and every major holiday, I would attend church, and along with the other children. Since we were in the orphanage, everybody attended. But at some point, I remember that some of the boys were taking the Eucharist, and I was never allowed to take the Eucharist. And then at some point I asked, why am I not allowed to take the Eucharist? And they told me that I had not been baptized.
Oh yeah, but they couldn't be bar mitzvah, so.
Well,
But it was kind of them to not force the religion on you, though, right?
well, they offered to allow me for my 10th birthday.
Oh, okay.
And my 10th birthday came and went, but I wasn't aware of time. In the orphanage, you were, day in and day out was the same. There was no seasonality, no understanding of time. And somehow I found out it was my birthday because somebody had told me that it had been my birthday, but we didn't celebrate birthdays at the orphanage. So I was never baptized, and then I was brought into the Jewish fold.
You were baptized. Oh my goodness. So did that experience alter your Judaism or your Jewish faith? You too? No?
I didn't know the difference because I was only Catholic, you know. And then I started studying religions. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I realized Hitler defined me as a Jew.
Right. So you reclaimed your religion.
Yeah.
Did Rosian, did your father share anything about his time as a partisan? Did he talk about that?
My brother and I gave my father a typewriter. Remember typewriters? Yeah. For his 80th birthday. And he started writing when he never wanted to talk about it much before.
Okay.
So he wrote quite a few experiences that he had in there, and it's just like in the movies you see about the partisans. And the reason he went in was because he thought if he was going to die, he would like to die fighting. And even there were difficulties because the Poles and the Russians, some of them were anti-Semitic.
Right.
So they always had to watch their backs to be sure that no danger was coming to them.
Even among the
Yeah.
partisans. How did he escape the ghetto to join the partisans?
That's a good story because he was working for a German in a factory. And the German, Fritz, he didn't like the war. He didn't understand the whole thing. He was trained to think of Jews as the Untermensch, the lowest of the low. And then the Yiddish language is so close to German, they could talk together, and the people were educated, and some were nice, and some, just like regular people. One day, he barrels in with his truck, takes my father, and takes him out of the ghetto. And that's how my father came to the partisan.
Wow, amazing, amazing. The question for all of you, how aware, and of course you were each young, Paul, you were, I guess, the youngest, but were you aware in the orphanage or Rosian in your hiding of what was happening to Jews in concentration camps? Did you have a sense of what was happening?
Not while I was in any of the Catholic orphanages. I did not know of the Holocaust. I did not know that, initially I did not know that I was Jewish. It is only because I excelled at the Catholic classes. For some reason, or I don't know why, perhaps because I felt that the church was like my parents. I excelled at the holiday classes, and I was kind of one of the nuns' pets. She would always call on me in class for certain religious questions. I was good at it. And they used to portray people in different ways. And Jews, for some reason or other, were always portrayed with horns. I do not know why, and then when I found out I was Jewish, because I hadn't been wasn't allowed to be baptized until they told me that I could, I thought that perhaps I did not have horns because I believed. And there are some incidences when I went to the restroom and I found out that I was circumcised and the other boys were not. I thought they'll go away when I get baptized.
That would be miraculous, right? Yeah.
Well,
oh my goodness! Wow. We are almost out of time. I want to ask you each one question. We've talked about, what you try to say to young people when you speak, but there are a lot of young people in the audience today. What advice would you give the future generation? Having gone through the experiences you all went through and had an extraordinary and incredible lives up to this point. What can we all learn from you?
Okay, you're looking at me. I'm selected.
Yeah, are you going to start?
Well, I don't know. Well, I actually do part of my talk, and I tell the most important thing is education. And God gave you a brain. Use it. And for sure, in today's environment with social media now, do not believe everything you hear. Think about it. Use your head. Don't just follow blindly something cool or anything you hear. And you have to be educated to do that. And I think this is so important. And, you know, I'm sad to say when you read about all the problems in education in America, I mean, who would ever dream that? You know, we were outstanding. We were the best. And you know, and even that may not be enough. In the 1930s, Germany was the America of the time. Most educated, most advanced in medicine, technology, great history of culture. And look what they did. So you cannot take anything for granted. Cannot take anything for granted. And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl wrote, things will happen to you that you have no control over. What is important is how you choose to respond. You all have choice. Nobody can take that away from you. Use your brain.
Rosian, Max?
Well, education is mandated in many states, including Texas, for the Holocaust. And education is something that is important because then you can know the facts and compare it to what is happening with social media and for propaganda and for all kinds of agendas. However, with education is knowledge. Then you have to act upon it. And that is where the future comes in with the students, because they are the future. They have the possibility to discern evil. They can discern what not to do, and then they can become the prophets themselves, to be the righteous, to do the things that change the world to something that is so difficult. We have been given free will. We can change things with our thoughts, with our hearts, with shalom.
And our actions,
Yeah.
right? Yes. Max?
I would say the same thing as Paul says. First, get educated, learn the facts before you act or react. Think about what you are doing and evaluate what people are saying and whether that agrees with your principles that your parents probably taught you, and try to emulate some of the upstanders.
Well, it's a good thing we've ended on a note about education, because we have some very committed, wonderful educators who are spending their day with us today. We thank you all for your work and for helping to ensure that that students know this history and understand the impact that they can have through their choices. I would love for you all to help me thank Rosian and Paul and Max for sharing their afternoon with us.
Thank you.